I beg to move that this House believes that Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation driven by an anti-Semitic ideology that seeks the destruction of Israel, notes that Hezbollah declares itself to be an organisation without distinguishable political or military wings, is concerned that the military wing of that organisation is proscribed, but its political wing is not, and calls on the government to include Hezbollah in its entirety on the list of proscribed organisations.
Yeah.
I will.
I'm very grateful, and I'm very pleased that my friend is bringing this issue to the House. I don't know if she's aware, but in December the government had a debate on the extension of proscribed organisations, and during that debate the Minister told me that the military organisation of Hezbollah was not proscribed, but that if Hezbollah supporters were engaged in terrorist activities in this country, they would be prosecuted. Does she agree with me that terrorist activities are not sufficient grounds for prosecution? There should be prosecution for incitement to hatred, there should be incitement to anti-Semitism and the other crimes which are taking place on the streets of London. And as the Mayor of London has called for, Hezbollah should be banned in its entirety.
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I thank him for that intervention, which I take as absolutely 100% support for this motion today. Mr Deputy Speaker, I am the Chair of Labour Friends of Israel, an organisation which has campaigned for many years on the issue which I will address and that stands before us today. Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation driven by anti-Semitic ideology which seeks the destruction of Israel. It has wreaked death and destruction throughout the Middle East, aiding and abetting the Assad regime's butchery in Syria and helping to drive Iran's expansionism throughout the region. It makes no distinction between its political and military wings, and neither should the British government. In 2010, the Obama administration labelled Hezbollah the most technically capable terrorist group in the world. Over the past 3 decades, it has been implicated in a string of deadly attacks against Israeli, Jewish and Western targets, both in the Middle East and far beyond. Its operatives have been arrested for plotting to carry out attacks across the globe in Europe, Asia, Africa and South America. The litany of death and violence widely attributed to Hezbollah includes the 1983 murder in Beirut of 241 American and 58 French peacekeepers, the 1986 wave of bombings against Jewish communal targets in Paris, which saw 13 people die, the 1992 attack on the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, in which 29 people died, the 1994 bombing of the Argentine Jewish Mutual Association, which led to the deaths of 85 people, the 1996 Koba Towers bombing, in which 19 US servicemen lost their lives and nearly 500 people were injured, and the 2012 attack on a bus of Israeli tourists in the Bulgarian resort of Burgas, which murdered 6 people and from which 2 people finally went on trial last week. Such terrorist acts are promoted, glorified and encouraged by the Hezbollah leadership. Hezbollah's General Secretary, Hassan Nasrallah, has, for instance, praised suicide bombings or martyrdom operations, as he prefers to describe them, as legitimate, honourable, legal, humanitarian and ethical actions, saying that those who love death will triumph over those who fear it. Give way to the honourable.
Anyway, she's making a very powerful speech already. Would she not agree that the 1,000 or so people who marched in London under the flag, the Hezbollah flag, are actually subscribing to the very agenda she's just described, that there is no difference between a military wing and a political wing, as Hezbollah itself continually acknowledges? The only difference, the only recognition of a difference, is in UK policy, not in reality, and it's time for that policy to change.
I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman, and I thank him for that intervention, because he is completely right. There is no distinction, and we need to be clear about that. Hezbollah's actions are driven by a deep-seated, intractable, vicious hatred of Jews. This House does not need to take my word for it. Hezbollah's leaders have proudly boasted of their anti-Semitism. If Jews all gather in Israel, declared Nasrallah, it will save us the trouble of going after them worldwide. Nor is Nasrallah a lone voice. Naim Qassem, Hezbollah's deputy leader, has said that the history of Jews has proven that regardless of the Zionist proposal, they are people who are evil in their ideas. I will, of course.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and she is indeed making a powerful case. Would she agree with me that, as well as being anti-Semitic, Hezbollah have also assassinated and murdered Christians? And as the honourable member opposite said, applying a difference between the military part of Hezbollah and the political part is a distinction without any meaning whatsoever.
John Ryan.
Again, I have no difficulty agreeing with my honourable friend on the point that he makes, and they have killed probably more Muslims than anybody else, but Christians and Jews and others. Hezbollah's leaders and its media peddle classic anti-Semitic tropes and lies. They refer to Jews in the basest of terms, labelling them apes and pigs, and suggest you will find no one more miserly or greedy than they are. They make spurious claims about Jewish conspiracies and world domination, and they deny the Holocaust, suggesting that, quote, the Jews invented the legend of the Nazi atrocities. Hezbollah's hatred of Jews is a noxious mix, which, in the words of one writer, fuses Arab nationalist-based anti-Zionism and anti-Jewish rhetoric from the Quran, and most disturbingly, the antique anti-Semitic beliefs and conspiracy theories of European fascism.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. Just to highlight the backers of Hezbollah, the Iranians, who provide training and weapons and provide them with rockets. Whilst the Iranian malevolent influence continues throughout the Middle East, they are jeopardising any future prospect of peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and also providing a strategic threat to the very state of Israel.
John Ryan.
The honourable gentleman makes a powerful point with which I absolutely agree, and I will come to that a little later in my contribution. Hezbollah is a menace throughout the Middle East, but Israel is its principal target. Again, there is no secret about this. In its founding manifesto in 1985, in which it also pledged its loyalty to Ayatollah Khamenei and urged the establishment of an Islamic regime, Hezbollah says of Israel, quote, our struggle will end only when this entity is obliterated. We recognise no treaty with it, no ceasefire and no peace agreements, whether separate or consolidated. This is no mere rhetorical sabre-rattling. Hezbollah vehemently opposed the Oslo peace process and has fought any normalisation of relations between Israel and Arab countries. On numerous occasions, most notably in 1993, 1996 and 2006, Hezbollah has sought to provoke conflicts with Israel. The consequences have been disastrous and devastating for the peoples of both Israel and Lebanon. In 2006, for instance, it kidnapped and murdered Israeli soldiers on the country's northern border and then proceeded to launch Katyusha rockets to indiscriminately pound the Jewish state. The resulting conflict led to large numbers of civilian casualties and the evacuation of several 100,000 people. In defiance of the UN Resolution 1701, which brought the conflict to an end, Hezbollah has spent the last decade restocking its arsenal and rebuilding its forces in Lebanon. It has trebled the size of its fighting force from 17,000 to 45,000 men. It has launched an arms procurement programme, amassing short, medium and long-range missiles and rockets, drones, precision-guided projectiles, anti-tank weaponry and ballistic missiles. It now has an estimated 120,000 to 140,000 rockets and missiles, an arsenal larger than that of many states. That Hezbollah has been allowed to replenish and then expand its armoury in this manner represents a terrible failure on the part of the international community, a breaking of the assurances provided to Israel and a betrayal of the people of Lebanon and Israel. The implications are truly horrifying. As Andrew Exum, an expert on the region and President Obama's former Deputy Assistant Secretary on Defence for the Middle East policy, wrote recently, I shudder to think what the next conflict will look like. Hezbollah has no qualms about such a war. It has no concern about or care for the loss of thousands of the civilian lives that its aggression will lead to. Israelis, Lebanese, Jews, Muslims and Christians. Indeed, quite deliberately, it has embedded its forces and weaponry in towns and villages, turning the people of southern Lebanon into human shields. Quite deliberately, it will, as it has in the past, target civilian population centres in Israel, even vowing, in the words of Nasrallah, that there will be no red lines in any future conflict, and underlining the pledge with threats to attack the Dimona nuclear reactor and the ammonia storage facility in Haifa. And quite deliberately, it will seek to draw in other regional actors. Hezbollah's capacity may be many times greater than other terrorist groups, but its aim to instil terror by inflicting mass civilian casualties are the same as those who wage attacks on targets big and small throughout the world. And they are the same as those who attacked London Bridge, the Manchester Arena and this House only last year. But Hezbollah has not simply exported terror globally and wreaked havoc in Israel and Lebanon. Its bloody fingerprints are all over the Syrian civil war, the most brutal conflict of this century. In 2016, it was estimated that more than a quarter of Hezbollah's forces were engaged in fighting on behalf of the murderous Assad regime. It has not only contributed to the killing fields of Aleppo and Homs, it has helped to eliminate the non-extremist opposition to Assad, thus contributing to the ranks of Sunni jihadists and stirring sectarian hatreds. Hezbollah has indeed become Iran's indispensable partner, the black water of Iran, as some have labelled it, helping to promote and further Tehran's expansionist agenda throughout the Middle East, in Syria, Iraq and Yemen. Such a vast enterprise cannot be run on the cheap. So in addition to the vast sums of weaponry and cash lavished on it by Iran, the Party of God is now engaged in money laundering, arms sales and drug smuggling. It works through informal networks and centrally run enterprises. The latter, one leading Middle East expert, told the US Congress last summer, operating like international organised criminal entities. Of course.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for giving way? But doesn't the various elements that she's now describing show the absolutely indissoluble nature of Hezbollah, not separate wings, but in fact one criminal terrorist entity?
My right honourable is absolutely right, and indeed this is a distinction that Hezbollah not only doesn't recognise but denies. As the House will be aware, the British government has long held the view that Hezbollah's military wing is involved in conducting and supporting terrorism. In 2001, the Hezbollah External Security Organisation was added to the list of proscribed organisations. In 2008, this prescription was extended by a reference to the military wing of Hezbollah, including the Jihad Council and all units reporting to it, including the Hezbollah External Security Organisation. However, Hezbollah's political wing is not prescribed. The distinction is not one that Hezbollah itself has ever recognised.
Would she mind giving way on that point? I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's making such a powerful case, and we're very grateful to her for bringing this to the House. Does she not agree that it should make both the government front bench and our opposition front bench deeply uneasy that they are currently effectively in an alliance together on refusing to recognise this bogus distinction between the so-called military wing and the rest?
I agree with my honourable friend, and I am hoping both front benchers will take note of the content of what I am saying and come forward with policy positions that support prescribing Hezbollah in its entirety.
The right honourable member aware of the Comres poll that has been conducted to show that 81% of the public want to see Hezbollah prescribed in its entirety. And would she agree with me, and I see there are some very honourable members on the opposite benches, would she agree with me that the Labour front bench have got this issue wrong and should actually agree with this motion rather than oppose it?
Well, obviously, unless the Labour front bench is agreeing with my position, then we have a difference of opinion. But I am calling on the government to change their position. I think, although I agree with the honourable gentleman, I think his point would have far more weight and power if he addressed his own front bench on the issue, as they are in a position to lead on this, and they are not doing so. I'm going to give way to...
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's so great to see you back in your seat. I hot-tailed it from my office in Normanshire South when I saw the Honourable Lady on the television screen and was absolutely inspired by the passion with which she is speaking. Now, she is a friend of Israel, and I am a friend of Israel, but does she agree with me that you don't have to be a friend of Israel to believe that Hezbollah, in its entirety, is a terrorist organisation? You can be a friend of Syria, you can be a friend of Lebanon, you can be a friend of the entire Middle East, and you should want Hezbollah entirety to be banned.
Well said. I absolutely agree with the honourable gentleman. And I would add one other thing to that as well. Hezbollah are a terrorist organisation and they should be banned in their entirety, whoever you're a friend of, if you're not a friend of the terrorist. And secondly, it isn't just for Jews to fight anti-Semitism, and these are an anti-Semitic organisation. It's for all of us to stand up on that issue.
Completely right. Here.
So the distinction is not one that Hezbollah has ever recognised. In fact, it has consistently and explicitly refuted it. And in 1985, its founding document stated clearly, as to our military power, nobody can imagine its dimensions because we do not have a military agent separate from the other parts of our body. Each of us is a combat soldier when the call of jihad demands it. It couldn't be clearer. In 2009, Naim Qassem, Hezbollah's Deputy General Secretary, made clear that, in his words, the same leadership that directs the parliamentary and government work also leads jihad actions in the struggle against Israel. Couldn't be clearer. He repeated this message 3 years later, declaring we don't have a military wing and a political one, we don't have Hezbollah on the one hand and the Resistance Party on the other. Every element of Hezbollah, from commanders to members, as well as our various capabilities, are in the service of the resistance, and we have nothing but the resistance as a priority. These are Hezbollah's own words. And also in 2013, Nasrallah himself ruled out any notion that the military and political wings were somehow different. He said, however jokingly, I will say, though I disagree on such separation or division, that I suggest that our ministers in the upcoming Lebanese government be from the military wing of Hezbollah. He also mocked our government's division between the two. The story of military wing and political wing is the work of the British. That's what he said. It is a distinction that, with good reason, many other countries throughout the world do not recognise. These include the Netherlands, Canada, the US, the Arab League and the Gulf Cooperation Council. I give way to the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee.
The Honourable Lady's passion and clarity in this is absolutely right, and I agree with her that this is incumbent upon the government in principle, and the opposition front bench, I hope, would follow, to change the policy. Because is it not absolutely possible to work with the government of Lebanon, a government with whom we're extremely friendly, a government whom we're assisting to defend herself against the predations of ISIS initially and now other factions in Syria? Is it not absolutely possible to assist our legitimate and welcome allies in Lebanon against that, and yet still call out this terrorist group for what it is, for the violence that it's committing in Syria, for the destructions it's doing into northern Israel and all around the region?
Absolutely. The honourable gentleman is right. And those governments that do prescribe Hezbollah in its entirety do talk to the Lebanese government. So if Hezbollah wishes to change its views on Israel, to not obliterate it, and wants to signal that it will give up its arms, I am sure, prescribed or otherwise, that would be the right road to take if they wish to take part in any peace negotiations, which they clearly do not. I know many members of this House don't recognise this false distinction between the military and political wing, as is evident here today. Last summer, once again, marchers at the Al-Quds Day Parade in London displayed Hezbollah flags, causing great offence to so many, especially in the Jewish community. And once again, they were exploiting this utterly bogus separation which the government chooses to make. I pay tribute to the Jewish communal organisations such as the Community Security Trust, the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council, which have tirelessly campaigned on the issue of Hezbollah proscription. And I'd like to thank my colleague and Honourable Member for Liverpool Riverside, as well as the Honourable Member for Hendon and the Mayor of London, for their efforts to persuade the government to prescribe Hezbollah in its entirety. I note not only the government's unwillingness to do so, but also its inability to explain or justify why it will not act. I understand that in conflict situations it's sometimes necessary to keep open channels of communication in order to facilitate dialogue and to encourage those who are engaged in violence to abandon the bomb and the bullet for the ballot box. However, there is not a shred of evidence to suggest that this is Hezbollah's intention. Both in its rhetoric and its actions, this leopard shows no sign of changing its spots. Nor do I accept the notion, which I know ministers have previously advanced, that banning Hezbollah's political wing might somehow, as the chair of the Select Committee has said, impede our ties with Lebanon, where Hezbollah exercises not just military but political power. Prescribing Hezbollah in its entirety does not appear to have hampered relations between Lebanon and any of the countries that we have already referred to. I am deeply concerned that this government is simply not taking the threat posed by Hezbollah seriously. Only last week I was informed by the Home Office that it does not collect data on the number of Hezbollah members or supporters in the UK, a practice which is followed by other European countries such as Germany. The 2000 Terrorism Act allows the Home Secretary to prescribe an organisation which commits or participates in acts of terrorism, prepares for terrorism, promotes or encourages terrorism, including the unlawful glorification of terrorism, or is otherwise concerned in terrorism. As I have demonstrated, I believe, Hezbollah, an organisation which in its own leaders asserts it's unified and indivisible, more than fulfils those criteria. But even if a distinction between the political and the military wings could be drawn, the words of the former, promoting, encouraging and glorifying terrorism, would surely meet the government's criteria for prescription. After last June's terrorist attack at London Bridge, the Prime Minister said, "There is, to be frank, far too much tolerance of extremism in our country." I agree. Hezbollah is an organisation driven by hatred of Jews, which promotes and encourages terrorism and calls for the destruction of the Middle East's only democracy, a key British ally in the region. But for so long as her government does not prescribe Hezbollah's so-called political wing, that tolerance will continue.
The question is, as on the order paper, can I suggest around 10 to 12 minutes for a minute without informing of proposing the limit to be prescription? Theresa Villiers.
Well, I would like to start by saying it is an honour to follow the Right Honourable Member for Enfield North, because she has made an exceptionally powerful speech on an issue which matters to so many of us. I'd also like to mention an entry on my register of interest regarding a visit to Israel I undertook in February. I'd also like to thank the very many constituents who have contacted me about this important debate today to make their view very clear. They want to see Hezbollah banned in its entirety. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's wonderful to see you back in the chair, even for a debate on a matter as sad and serious as this. As the Right Honourable Member for Enfield North has stated, and others intervening have stated as well, the distinction currently made in our law between Hezbollah's political and military wings is entirely artificial. This is a single operation. That has been stated by its leadership on numerous occasions. For example, its deputy leader, Naim Qassem, has said that Hezbollah has, quote, one leadership and one administration. Hezbollah's political leaders have a long history of personal involvement in the group's terrorist and criminal activities. Its Secretary-General, Hassan Nasrallah, is believed to have taken part in hostage-taking, plane hijacking and violent attacks on rivals. Hezbollah presents a clear danger to the security of our country. The decision to proscribe parts of the organisation was prompted by the 2012 attack on a bus of Israeli tourists in Bulgaria. But as we have already heard this afternoon, the list of their crimes and atrocities is a long one, not least the notorious truck bomb in Buenos Aires in '94, which killed 85 people, injured many more, and was the deadliest terrorist outrage in Argentina's history. Just a few years ago, when a Hezbollah operative in Cyprus was found guilty of planning to attack Israelis, he said he was collecting information about Jews, and this is what his organisation was doing everywhere in the world. We should be under no illusion. Hezbollah poses a serious threat to the citizens of this country and to our neighbours across Europe, and we should proscribe it in all its forms. In taking that step, the government would have considerable support from this House and from the public. Yesterday, the Jewish News published details of a wide-ranging Comrades representative poll they commissioned covering some 2,000 individuals. 44% would support the political wing being designated as a terrorist group, compared to just 10% who opposed. With 46% answering don't know, that means that 81% of those expressing a view back designation of the whole of Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation. And we should be in no doubt that the question we are debating today does matter in a very real, practical way. By limiting prescription to the so-called military wing, we are undermining the ability of the police to protect us from the danger that this group poses. The fact that some parts of Hezbollah are not prescribed limits the ability of law enforcement agencies to seize funds using asset freezing and forfeiture powers. Classifying the whole of the organisation as a terrorist group would significantly constrain their ability to raise funds and also stop them using UK banks to transfer any money around the world. And I would emphasise that terrorism isn't the only type of unlawful activity in which this organisation is involved. Just a few weeks ago, the French authorities referred a 15-member Hezbollah cell to a criminal court on money laundering charges. In October 2015, the US and French authorities arrested 2 individuals from Hezbollah, one in Atlanta and one in Paris. They were caught laundering drugs proceeds and seeking to purchase weapons and cocaine. According to court documents, they used Hezbollah-connected associates to provide security for narcotics shipments. One of those associates was located in the UK and apparently laundered $30,000 for a US Drug Enforcement Administration undercover agent posing as a narcotics trafficker. So the partial proscription of Hezbollah has not deterred the group from engaging in criminal conduct on British soil. Moreover, the Community Security Trust report that Hezbollah has been heavily involved in the drugs trade in South America. In February 2016, the US Drug Enforcement Agency uncovered a massive Hezbollah money laundering and drug trafficking scheme. In the view of the DEA, Hezbollah enjoys established business relationships with the South American drug cartels and is responsible for trafficking large quantities of cocaine into Europe and the US. Mr. Deputy Speaker, prescribing an organisation is a very serious step to take. It's right that the law sets out clear criteria which have to be satisfied before any minister could take this decision. There can be no doubt that those parts of Hezbollah which are overtly terrorist and military fall squarely within the definition in subsection 5 of section 3 of the Terrorism Act 2000, the relevant legislation. In my view, there is also a very strong case to say that the criteria of subsection 5 are also satisfied in relation to the political wing of Hezbollah. The political leaders of the organisation have promoted and encouraged the group's terrorist activities, as we have heard so powerfully explained by the Right Honourable Lady from Enfield North. It defines itself as one single organisation, and that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is how it should be treated by our legal system. Quite frankly, the annual Al-Quds Day March is a scandal. It's not acceptable that people can fly the Hezbollah flag on the streets of London and get away with it simply by adding a post-it note claiming support shown is for the political wing, not the military aspect of the organisation. This has got to stop. As the campaign emails which arrived in our inboxes pointed out, this is an embarrassment. They are laughing at us. In considering whether to prescribe an organisation, the Home Office guidance states that the Home Secretary should take into account factors including, quote, the need to support other members of the international community in the global fight against terrorism. It's time we follow the lead set by countries such as the USA, Canada and the Netherlands, who've implemented full prescription. Hezbollah have been carrying out murderous attacks in countries around the world for over 30 years. It is an organisation heavily implicated in crime and money laundering, as well as being a deeply malevolent presence in the Syrian war. It is a violent, anti-Semitic organisation whose main ambition is the complete destruction of the State of Israel. We should ban it, all of it, now.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it's absolutely fantastic to see you back in the chair. And I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Chipping Barnett on her speech. I agreed with every word. And I thought the speech by my right honourable friend, the member for Enfield North, was absolutely superb, absolutely brilliant. And she should be commended for that. And I want to thank as well all the people from Dudley who've written to me about this issue, telling me that they think Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation, that they think it should be banned in its entirety, and that waving its flag is an incitement to terrorism and to violence. As we've heard, this organisation has carried out terrorist attacks and racist murders in the Middle East, in Europe and across the world. Its stated aim is the destruction of Israel, but it does not limit its attacks to people in Israel. It targets Jewish people anywhere and everywhere. It is not true to claim that there is a political wing and a military wing. As has been said already, Hezbollah itself does not make this distinction, and this supposed distinction undermines the fight against terrorism. And that's why the United States, France, the Gulf Cooperation Council, Canada, the Netherlands and Israel have all prescribed Hezbollah in full, and why I can't understand why our government is not prepared or has not been prepared to do the same. I very much hope that that stance will change as a result of this debate this afternoon, of course.
Thank you very much for giving way. We've heard in the past that prescribing Hezbollah might somehow be destabilising to Lebanon and the wider region. But does he not agree with me that by engaging in this pretense, by indulging a terrorist organisation, the people we're actually destabilising are the many moderates in Lebanon who are determined to marginalise the terrorists, marginalise the extremists, marginalise Hezbollah?
Yeah, he's completely right about that, and this is a point that my right honourable friend from Enfield North made when she opened this debate, and it's a point that I thought was made very eloquently by the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I think it's completely unacceptable, Mr Deputy Speaker, to see Hezbollah's flag waved on the streets of Britain, and it's disgusting to hear the virulently racist abuse and racist chants which accompany it. So I agree with many of the points that have been made already today, but there are three particular issues on which I want to focus. First, I want to talk about Hezbollah's role in the Middle East and its impact on the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians. Now, we've debated that many times in this House, but we should be under absolutely no illusion at all that the difficult issues that negotiations will need to confront, borders, land swaps, status of Jerusalem, settlements, all these issues, let's be really honest about this, none of these are issues which remotely interest Hezbollah. It's not interested in the compromises that all sides will need to make to bring about a two-state solution. Its sole interest is the destruction of Israel. Hezbollah itself has made this absolutely clear. The war is on, it declared in 1992, until Israel ceases to exist and the last Jew in the world has been eliminated. Israel is completely evil and must be erased from the face of the earth. And that's why, Mr Deputy Speaker, when Israel unilaterally withdrew from southern Lebanon in 2000, Hezbollah's response wasn't peace, but the murder and kidnapping of Israeli soldiers and an avalanche of rocket attacks just 6 years later. And that's why today Hezbollah, thanks to its Iranian paymasters, threatens Israel by pointing 120 to 140,000 rockets at the country. In October, Hassan Nasrallah, in just one of the Hezbollah's leaders' many threats, urged Jews to flee Israel before it is devastated by war. Last February, he warned that there would be no red lines in any future conflict between the terror group and Israel. In April, he boasted of his organisation's preparedness for war, and in June he spoke of the, quote, hundreds of thousands of Shia fighters from across the Middle East who would rush to Hezbollah's side when it next takes the fight to the Jewish state.
Would he mind?
Of course.
He is making an excellent case, as he always does. It's also really important, is it not, to keep reminding people of the role that Hezbollah has played in training the Houthi rebels, which is causing such terrible carnage and destruction and death in Yemen.
Absolutely.
In Lebanon and in Israel, in Syria and in the Yemen, Hezbollah is causing carnage across the Middle East, and that is its stated aim, of course.
Thank my honourable friend, the honourable gentleman, for giving way. Would he agree, as others have said, that actually one of the best ways of defeating Hezbollah is by trying to install or encourage or assist a stable, functioning Lebanese state?
Well, that's completely correct. And again, this is a point that was made very eloquently by the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee earlier. And he goes to the Middle East a lot. He knows a lot of people there. He's an expert on the region. And, you know, what he says is worth listening to. And I very much hope his front bench will be listening to the advice that they've just been given. Now, analysts, Mr. Deputy Speaker, warn that the next conflict between Israel and Hezbollah will likely be the most destructive Arab-Israeli war yet. Israel's military believes that in a future conflict, Hezbollah will be able to launch 1,500 rockets and missiles a day. Israel has increased its defensive capabilities, but Hezbollah is likely to target military facilities, important infrastructure and civilian population centres too. In the past, Nasrallah has threatened that Hezbollah will attack an ammonia storage facility in Haifa, as well as a nuclear reactor at Dimona. Now, the week before last, I was in Haifa, Mr. Deputy Speaker, just over 20 miles from the border with Lebanon, and the site of Israel's oil refinery, and therefore one of the main targets for Hezbollah. And imagine the carnage and the devastation and the civilian deaths that could result when Hezbollah start raining down missiles on Haifa in a future conflict, as they have done from just a few miles away in the past. Now, sadly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Israel's experience in southern Lebanon is repeated in Gaza. Israel signed an agreement on movement and access on Gaza with the Palestinian Authority that gave the Palestinians control over their borders for the first time in history, allowed imports and exports, and approved construction of a seaport and discussions on an airport. It pulled out of Gaza, but just as in Lebanon, an Islamist movement, a terrorist organisation, a powerful armed militia, this time Hamas, also equipped by Iran, just as committed to Israel's destruction as Hezbollah, launched a coup, banned elections, drove out Fatah, threw fellow Palestinians from the rooftops, executed people summarily outside mosques after Friday prayers, and declared themselves the new rulers of Gaza, and that they would use the Strip as a basis to destroy Israel. So the unilateral withdrawal of 8,500 Israelis from Gaza was not meant by peace, but by rockets and attack tunnels after Hamas's brutal takeover. And so you can understand why, when you look at the experience in Lebanon and you look at the experience in Gaza, you can understand why, whether people in here like it or not. The experience in Lebanon and Gaza makes the Israelis very reticent about pulling out of the West Bank. Now, the Iranian proxy Hezbollah poses a significant threat to the security and stability, as we've just heard from my honourable friend from Barrow, in the Middle East, explicitly the whole of the Middle East, not just Israel. And this is the second point that I want to make. That Hezbollah has played a particularly pernicious and powerful role in the internal affairs of Lebanon. Its armed forces have been described as more effective than Lebanon's army. Its military power is used on occasion to pressurise the Lebanese government, allowing Iran to exercise influence in the country. Once seen as a state within a state, Hezbollah's growing influence in Lebanon threatens to draw Israel's northern neighbour and its army into any future conflict. Now, the third point I want to make is this. Hezbollah's so-called resistance against Israel is influenced, as we heard, by its deeply anti-Semitic ideology. The group's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, has said, if Jews all gather in Israel, it will save us the trouble of going after them worldwide. He also suggested God imprinted blasphemy on the Jews' hearts. Naim Qassam, Hezbollah's deputy leader, has said that, quote, the history of Jews has proved that, regardless of the Zionist proposal, they are a people who are evil in their ideas. And the late Grand Ayatollah Mohammed Hussein Fadlallah, one of Hezbollah's most influential figures, peddled anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jews. He said, the Jews want to be a world superpower. The Jews will work on the basis that Jewish interests are above all world interests. Now, I've criticised the government for not prescribing Hezbollah, but I also want to address some remarks to my own party as well. And I want to say this. In 2009, at a meeting of the so-called Stop the War Coalition, which actually must be, I think, probably the worst or most inappropriately named organisation in British politics, the leader of the Labour Party said that he invited, quote, friends from Hamas and Hezbollah to an event in Parliament. And later, when asked why he had called them friends, he said, I use it in a collective way, saying our friends are prepared to talk. And he said, there is not going to be a peace process unless there is talks involving Israel, Hezbollah and Hamas. Firstly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, who would describe a racist, fascistic and terrorist organisation like Hezbollah as friends? Who would do that? I think Social Democrats, indeed all Democrats, should always be crystal clear about describing totalitarian movements and governments, whether that's Hezbollah or, for instance, the Iranian dictatorship which backs Hezbollah. And second, I think the statements by the leaders of Hezbollah make it very, very clear that they have absolutely no interest in the negotiations and compromises that could lead to peace. I think that's very clear. The idea that Hezbollah is a partner for peace is utterly misguided. Their contribution to the Oslo peace process was to threaten to murder Jewish tourists and businessmen visiting Arab countries, which normalised their relations with Israel. But even if you set all that to one side, I don't think the leadership of our party has shown the same interest in speaking to the Israelis. And invitations to meet the leaders of Labour's own sister party, who have repeatedly invited our leadership to visit Israel and talk to them about their plans, our leader, I should say, to visit Israel and talk to them about their plans to bring the conflict to an end, have not been accepted. Now, the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is enormously difficult and complex. There are no easy answers, and if there were, they would have been found by now. But some elements, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are clearer than others, and the case, I think, of Hezbollah is one of them. This is an anti-Semitic, racist terror group acting at the behest of Iran, which wishes to drive Jews from the Middle East and murder Jews around the world.
Absolutely.
Hezbollah is part of the problem. It will never be part of the solution. And that's why this House and our government should agree today to prescribe it in its entirety.
David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. May I say too how very pleased I am to see you in the chair today. I also congratulate the Right Honourable Member for Enfield North on her opening and for securing this important debate, and the Backbench Business Committee for facilitating it. And I should declare an interest as Chair of the Council for Arab-British Understanding. Now, there is no doubt that Hezbollah is a terrorist organisation. Indeed, it is one of the largest, most powerful, most vicious, most dangerous terrorist organisations in the world. Although it is ostensibly a political party, and indeed is one of the key players, political players in Lebanon, it also overtly and rigidly adheres to the Shiite revolutionary agenda of Iran. Its emergence in 1982, in the wake of the Israeli invasion of South Lebanon, was directly attributable to the intervention of Iran. And the influence of Iran was made clear in Hezbollah's manifesto, dated 1985, which stated, "We are the sons of the Ummah, the party of God, the vanguard of which was made victorious by God in Iran." Hezbollah, in truth, is an Iranian proxy, closely associated with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and like Iran, it considers the United States and Israel to be its principal enemies. Early in its existence, Hezbollah pledged allegiance to Ayatollah Khomeini, and since Khomeini's death in 1989, it has continued allegiance to his successor, Ali Khamenei. Central to the ideology of Hezbollah is the concept of resistance, chiefly to the United States and Israel, and resistance is Hezbollah code for terrorist activity. And indeed, the history of Hezbollah has been one of one terrorist act after another. In April 1983, very shortly after its formation, it carried out a suicide attack on the United States Embassy in Beirut, killing 63 people. 6 months later, there was another suicide bombing of the US Marine barracks in Beirut, which killed 241. US nationals have been repeatedly targeted by Hezbollah. And indeed, Hezbollah was responsible for killing more Americans than any other terrorist organization until the 9/11 attacks on New York City. Israel and Israeli interests too have also been the repeated target of Hezbollah terrorism. After Israel withdrew from South Lebanon in 2000, Hezbollah carried out numerous cross-border incursions, culminating in an attack in July 2006 that killed 8 Israeli soldiers. In the conflict that followed, Hezbollah fired thousands of Iranian-supplied rockets into Israeli territory, killing 39 civilians and 120 soldiers. Hezbollah has also planned and executed many other terrorist attacks outside the region, including on the European continent. And currently, 2 Hezbollah operatives are being tried in their absence for the 2012 bombing of a bus carrying Israeli citizens at Burgas airport in Bulgaria. Such actions are seen to be part of the so-called resistance to Israel that is one of Hezbollah's avowed objectives. And many of the attacks, too, have been on non-Israeli Jewish people and Jewish interests, and the Right Honourable Lady gave an extensive catalogue of those attacks. Now, quite understandably and quite properly, Hezbollah's activities have led to it being designated a terrorist organisation in many parts of the world. In 1996, Israel listed Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation, followed by the United States in 1997. It's also been proscribed by Canada, the Netherlands, New Zealand, France and Bahrain. In March 2016, the Gulf Cooperation Council designated Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation, stressing its status as a proxy for Iran in regional conflicts, including the Houthi rebellion in Yemen. The Secretary-General of the GCC, Abdulatif bin Rashid al-Zayani, commented, "The GCC states consider Hezbollah militias' practices in the Council states and their terrorist and subversive acts being carried out in Syria, Yemen and Iraq contradict moral and humanitarian values and principles and international law and pose a threat to Arab national security." And very recently, in November of last year, most of the Arab League's 22 members condemned Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation, stating it was supporting terrorist groups across the Middle East by supplying them with weapons, including ballistic missiles. Now, the United Kingdom's position on Hezbollah has been somewhat more nuanced. In 2001, the UK proscribed Hezbollah's external security organisation under the Terrorism Act of 2000, and that proscription was extended to the military wing of Hezbollah, including the Jihad Council in 2008, as a consequence of Hezbollah's targeting of British soldiers in Iraq. The UK was instrumental in persuading the European Union to designate the military wing as a terrorist entity in 2013. However, the British government has consistently been reluctant to extend the prescription to the entirety of Hezbollah. In an explanatory memorandum to the European Scrutiny Committee in August 2013, the then Minister for Europe, now my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, stated that although the UK does not engage with Hezbollah's political wing, some EU member states do engage with it as a political party in Lebanon, and therefore they had concerns over the effect of EU designation on their engagement. By differentiating between Hezbollah's political and military wings, the designation, he said, would not prevent those EU member states who had contacts with Hezbollah's political representatives from maintaining such contact. And he went on to say in the same memorandum that the military wing of Hezbollah was separate from the political wing, which included ministers, members of parliament and other representatives, and was overseen by a political council. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would suggest that that distinction is completely illusory. The fact is that Hezbollah itself denies that there is any distinction to be drawn between its military and political wings.
Would my honourable friend give that?
I will give that.
My right honourable friend is making a very, very persuasive speech. Does he not agree with me that it would be as absurd to suggest that you could distinguish between the British government and the British armed forces, and that somehow you could declare the British armed forces an enemy without declaring the British government an enemy? The armed forces are under the control of and the direction of the political arm of Hezbollah, and therefore they must be treated as one.
Well, my honourable friend is entirely right, and I agree with him, and perhaps more to the point, Hezbollah itself agrees with him. In 2000, Hezbollah's Deputy General Secretary, Naim Qassem, declared that Hezbollah's Secretary General is the head of the Shura Council and also the head of the Jihad Council. And this means that we have one leadership with one administration. And again, in 2012, he said, we don't have a military wing and a political one. We don't have Hezbollah on one hand and the resistance party on the other. Every element of Hezbollah, from commanders to members, as well as our various capabilities, is in the service of the resistance. And we have nothing but the resistance as a priority. So the fact is that Hezbollah is in reality a single entity, and it is ludicrous to suggest that it is not. And as a single entity, it is a threat to the entire world. British interests, not least, are affected by it. And my right honourable friend, the member for Chipping Barnet, gave again a catalogue of the extent to which Hezbollah are carrying out activities which are directly threatening British interests and are also carrying out crimes on the streets of Britain. And at an arguably less dangerous but nevertheless highly offensive level, Hezbollah protesters routinely display Hezbollah flags on the streets of London. That's events such as Al-Quds Day, disingenuously labelling them as flags of the political wing of Hezbollah rather than its military wing. It's very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the partial ban is not having the desired effect, or I would suggest much effect at all. The government has contended that banning the organisation in its totality might destabilise the political order in Lebanon. Well, however, I would suggest that the greatest destabilising influence in Lebanon is Hezbollah itself. Four Hezbollah members, even as we debate today, are being tried before the Special Tribunal for Lebanon in connection with the murder of the late Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. Hezbollah forces have supported the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and the organisation continues to carry out terrorist attacks against Israeli interests. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst I understand the concerns and the anxieties of the government, I would suggest that the partial proscription has not had the effect either of curbing Hezbollah's terrorist activities or of clearing Hezbollah from the United Kingdom. Hezbollah is on our streets, defiantly waving its flags and it's thumbing its nose at the British government. I would consequently urge the government to give reconsideration to its stance on this issue and to conclude that Hezbollah, a dangerous, aggressive terrorist organisation, that is a threat to regional stability and to the security of this country should be proscribed in its entirety.
Louise Elder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a great privilege to follow so many excellent contributions from all sides of the House. And I'd like to thank my right honourable friend for securing this very important debate and for her very powerful contribution in opening this extremely important debate here today. Hezbollah is a radical Shia Islamist terrorist organisation founded in Iran soon after the 1979 revolution. It is an anti-Semitic organisation and carries out acts of international terrorism. It should be proscribed in its entirety. Instead, the UK accepts the spurious distinction between Hezbollah's political and military wings, banning the military wing but permitting the so-called political wing to operate. As honourable members have pointed out during this debate, Hezbollah itself does not accept this distinction. And, for example, the Deputy Secretary-General Naim Qassem said in 2012, very explicitly, we don't have a military wing and a political one. We don't have Hezbollah on the one hand and the Resistance Party on the other. The evidence that Hezbollah engages in terrorism and engenders hate is overwhelming. Hezbollah was behind the bombing of the Jewish Community Centre in Buenos Aires in Argentina in 1994, killing 85 people. It has murdered people, Jews, Christians, Muslims and others, in places such as Nigeria, Thailand, Bulgaria and Cyprus, and it is complicit with the murderous Assad regime in Syria. Operating with Assad and with Iran, it is part of the axis of resistance which seeks to confront Sunni power, Western influence and Israel. It is a malign influence. Hezbollah explicitly promotes anti-Semitism. Al-Manar, Hezbollah TV, was the first media outlet to make the false claim that 4,000 Jews or Israelis did not go to work in the World Trade Center on 9/11, allegedly based on advice from Mossad. This lie has now become a widespread anti-Semitic libel. Hezbollah's message incites violence. Esther Webman, who has studied Hezbollah's anti-Semitic motives, has concluded that Hezbollah's brand of anti-Semitism is typical of contemporary violent Islamist groups, describing it as combining traditional Islamist perceptions with Western anti-Semitic terminology and motives to express its opposition to Zionism, which in turn is equated not only with the State of Israel, but with imperialism and Western arrogance. This issue has very serious implications for us here in the UK. At the annual Al-Quds March in London last June, Hezbollah's green and yellow flag, the same flag displayed at military operations, was put on show. The purpose of the march and of Al-Quds Day itself is to agitate for violent resistance and the destruction of the State of Israel. At the centre of the flag, the largest Arabic word in green reads Hezbollah. Out of the word Hezbollah emerges a globe with an upraised arm grasping an assault rifle. The letter A of Allah is linked to the upraised arm grasping the assault rifle, signifying the ideological legitimization of Hezbollah's armed resistance as being divinely sanctioned. That message is clear, it is menacing, and it is extremely powerful.
Absolutely.
The menacing chants that took place at that march on the streets of London last year included the heinous chant, Zionists, ISIS are the same, only difference is the name. I will.
Speech. Thank you. It's also worth pointing out that the march was led by the director of the Islamic Human Rights Commission, who, during his speech, blamed the Grenfell Tower tragedy on the Zionists, which, as we all know, is a euphemism for Jews. The whole enterprise was just entirely bonkers, as well as being anti-Semitic.
The honourable member makes a very important point, and indeed I will make reference to the Grenfell Tower disaster in a moment or two in my contribution. All of this is inciting violence, hatred and division here on the streets of the UK. And this is taking place as anti-Semitic offences in this country reach record levels, as shown in the recent Community Security Trust report. There are many other disturbing recent examples of incitement to hatred, and I refer to the important point raised by the honourable member just a moment ago. For example, Tora Ahmed, a volunteer running a network helping the survivors of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, has claimed that the 71 people who perished were burnt in a Jewish sacrifice. Disgusting. That is horrendous. Disgusting. Horrendous incitement to hatred. Absolutely. On that march, at that Al-Quds event, some marchers held flags with small stickers attached to them stating, "I support the political wing of Hezbollah." This was designed to give the marchers protection against any legal challenge, pretending that the political wing of Hezbollah is somehow a separate entity. This is a farce. The flags indicate military might. Their display incites hatred on our streets and division in our communities. I recently went to see the Metropolitan Police to express great concern about the expressions of hatred on our streets, specifically in relation to that Al-Quds march, but also in relation to other recent events. And I asked the police why they were not taking any action against this incitement to hatred. It was clear in the discussions that then ensued that a key factor in the police's failure to act was that Hezbollah's political wing is not illegal, and neither is displaying the flag. I give way.
I too have met with the Metropolitan Police and with Pat Gallup, and she informed me that they have had a Queen's Counsel opinion which states that they are not able to take any action for the very reasons that she outlines. However, she did not feel that it was appropriate for me to read that opinion, but a legal opinion is simply just that, an opinion.
The member makes a very important point, which I think should be pursued further, and my discussions with the Metropolitan Police made it clear that their decisions on how to deal with individual incidents are to do with the legal situation at the time, the need to have freedom of expression and the police's interpretation of how those two aspects interact. So opinions are important, but so is incitement on our streets. It is time for change. The fallacy that Hezbollah has two separate sections should be exposed. Under UK law, only the so-called military wing of Hezbollah is listed as a prescribed terrorist organisation. The evidence is absolutely clear, the evidence abroad and the evidence here in the UK on our streets. Hezbollah is a single terrorist anti-Semitic entity. It is guilty of mass murder abroad, promotes terrorism and discord across the Middle East, and now imports anti-Semitism and anti-Western hatred onto the streets of London, sowing discord and division amongst our communities. I call for Hezbollah to be banned in its entirety. I hope the Labour front bench is listening and listening hard to the contributions coming from this side of the House, but it is the government who are responsible for what happens, and I ask the Minister to take action.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I apologise for ducking out my honourable friend because I wanted to sign the Holocaust Memorial Day book, and I recommend that any members take the opportunity to do so before it closes in the next half an hour. I congratulate the Honourable Lady for Enfield North for securing this debate. Hezbollah claims to be the party of God, but in fact it is simply a genocidal anti-Semitic terror group based in Lebanon that seeks the destruction of Israel and extermination of all Jews worldwide. The organisation is well known, and my honourable friend Chippen Barnett reminded us of the terror attack that took place, killing Jews in the 1994 bombing of a Jewish community centre in Buenos Aires. It actually killed 85 people. And the honourable member for Dudley North also reminded us of the leader of the Labour Party's comment when he actually described infamously that Hezbollah were his friends. well, they're no friends of mine. But one important aspect that I'd like to remind the House is that Hezbollah is actually a creation of Iran, and it's one of Iran's most important and powerful international terrorist proxies, giving Iran extensive access to the Arab world. Iran has provided hundreds of millions of pounds for Hezbollah's weapons, technology and salary for tens of thousands of fighters. In June 2006, Hezbollah Secretary-General Hassan Nasrallah confirmed that Hezbollah is open about the fact that its budget, income, expenses, everything it eats and drinks, its weapons and rockets, come from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And before leaving office in December 2016, former UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon reportedly said that he had concerns about Nasrallah's remarks, stating that Iran's supply of weapons to Hezbollah violates a long-standing arms embargo against the country. And with Iran's support as well, Hezbollah fighters have been deeply engaged in supporting Iranian ally President Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria and gaining battle experience in preparation probably for their next attempted conflict with Israel. Hassan Nasrallah has repeatedly threatened Israel with war, warning that Hezbollah is ready to strike anywhere in Israel with no limits. Iran has established rocket factories in Lebanon under Hezbollah's full control, which together with military positions and other weaponry are located throughout civilian villages in southern Lebanon. The terror group now has up to 150,000 rockets, again the member from Dudley North reminded us, capable of striking the whole of Israel. Last week, Madam Deputy Speaker, I presented a petition to the House of Parliament on behalf of 896 people in my Hendon constituency, calling on the government to prescribe the political as well as the military arm of the Hezbollah organisation under the Terrorism 2000 Act. Currently, the government distinguishes between Hezbollah's so-called political and military wings, even though, as has been said, the group itself does not. Now, I've attended the Al-Quds March on many occasions, and most recently I attended last year with former MP Michael McCann, who spoke at the event. And we not only spoke, but we also witnessed the yellow flags of Hezbollah featuring a large green assault rifle being waved with impunity on our streets. And despite the countless representations that have been made by the Honourable Member for Liverpool Riverside, the Metropolitan Police and ministers have failed to take any action upon this. Now, the Islamic Human Rights Commission, who organises the march, have provided guidance on its website for participants beforehand, advising that while flags of illegal organisations could not be waved at the event, demonstrators could bring a Hezbollah flag to show support for the political wing of Hezbollah. I take some credit for them putting that up on their website, because I called upon the Met Police to ban the march 2 years ago. I received not only abuse, but certainly correspondence from the Islamic so-called human rights group, who told me that they've never had any illegal flags. They were, of course, referring to Daesh and not the Hezbollah. Subsequently, they have now advised people that they should, as has been said, put a post-it note on their flag to say they're supporting the political wing and not the military wing. Now, the Home Secretary has explained recently that for an offence to be committed of displaying a flag, the contents and manner in which it is displayed must demonstrate that it is specifically in support of the prescribed military wing of the group. So, taking this into account, flags flown at the march featured their disclaimers, as I've already said, that they don't support the military wing but the political wing, even though we've been reminded that Hamas itself says that it does not recognise any difference between its organisation.
I thank my honourable friend for Hendon for giving way. I think Hezbollah is appalling, and I would very much like to see it banned. I have one argument that might say it shouldn't be, and that might be that our security services, and we will never know this, are advising the Minister it's better to keep them where we can see them rather than send them underground. That might be the only argument against it.
I thank you for that intervention. I'm not in favour of banning things, I have to say. But the hurt, resentment, agitation and general disruption that this annual march causes, not only the Metropolitan Police but also the people of London, in itself should mean that the march should be banned. This year, I called it again upon the Metropolitan Police not to allow the march to go ahead. And what was infuriating is that the days after the Grenfell Tower fire, when the police were massively stretched with such a tragedy. They insisted on going ahead, even though the Metropolitan Police did not have the resources to police the march. And I think that is reprehensible on behalf of the IHRC. Now, this year, the march was led by the director of the IHRC, Nazim Ali, who, in a speech, my honourable friend for Richmond, sorry, it eluded me, has already mentioned, where Nazim Ali, blamed the Grenfell fire tragedy on the Zionist supporters of the Tory party and accused the Israeli Defence Force of being a terrorist organisation that murdered Palestinian Jews and British soldiers. Participants in the rally called for the destruction of Israel and waved slogans, including one stating, "We are all Hezbollah." Shockingly, but perhaps unsurprisingly, the leader of the opposition has spoken at this annual event in the past. I would take this opportunity to call upon him not to do so again in the future. Now, senior Hezbollah officials have repeatedly said, as we have heard, that Hezbollah is a single entity, proudly stating that their resistance is their priority, and even publicly mocking the UK and other European countries for distinguishing between the two wings.
Before the honourable gentleman moves on, I think he's making a powerful speech, which I agree with. Just to say, the Mayor for London, Sadiq Khan, has, in response, I think, to the Al-Quds Day march and complaints and offence that has rightly been taken to that, he has asked for Hezbollah to be proscribed.
Makes a really good point, and I wanted to respond. Earlier, I intervened on her, and I'm grateful that she took my intervention. And she's absolutely right. It's not just the Labour front bench, but it's also the government front bench. And I certainly hope that they hear what I'm saying today during this speech. And it is not just one party or another. And I certainly don't seek to make this a party political issue. But I have to say that when I do see the Shadow Home Secretary rolling her eyes at some of the comments that the Labour backbenchers have been saying, it does make me think her heart's not really in this issue and is not as concerned as many of us on this side, or indeed behind her, as members are. But I go on. The Home Office guidance to the legislation says that under the Terrorism Act 2000, the Home Secretary may prescribe an organisation if she believes it is concerned in terrorism and it is proportionate to do so. For the purposes of the Act, this means that the organisation commits or participates in acts of terrorism, prepares for terrorism, promotes or encourages terrorism, including the unlawful glorification of terrorism, or is otherwise concerned with terrorism. It is worth restating that senior Hezbollah officials have openly and repeatedly stated that no substantive separation exists between so-called political and military wings. Given this fact, I believe that Hezbollah meets the criteria for full prescription under the Terrorism Act. And it is not just the Jewish community in this country who are distressed by Hezbollah's overt presence in the UK. It is those of us who deplore terrorism and hate all kinds of bigotry, and those of us who want this country to be a welcoming and safe place for our many diverse communities. Now, a lot of members aren't able to be here today because they have returned to their constituencies. No doubt that they will be attending Holocaust Memorial commemorations this weekend. But we must not underestimate the strength of feeling amongst the British public in favour of rooting out anti-Semitism and hatred wherever it occurs. Anti-Semitism is rising across Europe, and we are commemorating Holocaust Memorial Day on Saturday. We must be the ones to say, enough is enough. It is in the best interests of all of us to prescribe Hezbollah in full. So let us demonstrate our commitment to tackling extremism by finally putting aside the mistaken belief that there is a political wing of Hezbollah. It quite simply does not exist. And my constituents do not think we should wait any longer before admitting this. And so do I.
Sharon Hodgson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I want to thank my honourable friend, the member for Enfield North, for securing this very important debate today, and it has indeed been an excellent debate. I feel it's incredibly important that the Home Secretary takes a clear look at Hezbollah, their activities and the positions they take. Hezbollah, as we know, are involved in a number of terrorist activities and have made clear their desire to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. But today, the main concern I wish to raise is their anti-Semitic language. Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to take a moment to read out some of the comments made by leaders of Hezbollah to fully emphasise and understand the shocking nature of these comments. Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, is quoted as saying, and I quote with deep discomfort, "The Jews are a cancer which is liable to spread at any moment." End quote. He also said, "If they all gather in Israel, it will save us the trouble of going after them worldwide." End quote. But it is not only Nasrallah, but his deputy too. Naim Qassem is quoted as saying, "The history of Jews has proven that regardless of the Zionist proposal, they are a people who are evil in their ideas." End quote. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am sure members from across this House, as we've heard, will agree that these comments are utterly deplorable and should be challenged at every opportunity we have. This kind of language should not be allowed to continue, as it feeds into their terrorist ideology, which calls for the destruction of Israel, but also the wider Jewish people. This is something we have heard in the past, and we stood against it then, and we should stand up against it now. This language being used in our society should not be tolerated, whether it is here or elsewhere in the world. There is absolutely no place for it. What is especially pertinent when recommitting to standing up to this hate-filled language is that, as we speak, many are gathering just across Parliament Square to remember the Holocaust at the Holocaust Memorial Day service at the QE2 Centre. And I was torn today. I was wanting to take part in both, but I chose to come here to this House to make this speech today. And only a week ago in this chamber, colleagues stood here and movingly marked this auspicious day. The theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is the power of words, with an aim to explore how language was used in the past and is still used in the present. It reminds us never to be complacent. Right now, an organisation is lawfully allowed to be supported in this country who calls for the annihilation of one of our allies and a whole ethnic population, and last year saw their flags, as we've heard, flown on the streets of our capital. Hatred should not go unchallenged, wherever it may raise its ugly head. The British Government must stand strong with resolve to say enough is enough, and we will not stand for their hatred and terrorist activity. We can all agree that Hezbollah are a dangerous organisation who commit terrorist crimes across the world in the name of their warped view of Islam and repeatedly vocalise hate-filled language towards a group which they wish to exterminate. There is no room for their deep-seated hatred, none at all. Therefore, in response to this debate, I hope the Home Secretary, although not present, will ensure that she listens in full to the concerns raised from across this House today. Thank you.
Jim Shannon. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's always a pleasure to speak in this House, but it's especially a pleasure to speak in this issue, and it is very pleasing to follow the Honourable Lady for Washington and Sunderland West and their contribution, and all the other contributions by right honourable and honourable members, and if I could just, don't mind me doing so, but pick out in particular the Honourable Lady for Enfield North for setting the scene so very, very well for us all, and to make a contribution. Whenever I was asked by the Honourable Lady would I accompany her to the Backbench Committee to ask and request this debate, I was very happy to do so, because it's something that I feel in my heart that I want to be part of this debate today as well. And as someone who has lived through a terrorist conflict and bear the emotional and physical scars which others in this chamber have, some very, very gallant members in this chamber have, this is a topic which is of great interest to me. The first question that I believe we must ask ourselves is this: what is the first duty of government? And that's been clearly outlined by every member who has spoken. The first duty of any government is to protect the public. Are we protecting the public? Can we do better? Yes, we can. The first duty of any government is to do that. The requirement for protection cannot, of course, be guaranteed, but there will always be those determined to break through or get around whatever security measures our government has put in place. But I believe it is the government's job to do what it can to ensure that in a free society people can go about their lives facing the smallest possible risk of crime or terrorist attack. In this debate today that is taking place, because it marks a failure, if I can say, Madam Deputy, it marks a failure to provide that protection. On the 4th of June 2017, the day after the London Bridge terror attack, where 8 people were killed and 48 injured, the Prime Minister, my Prime Minister, everyone's Prime Minister, stood in front of Downing Street and said this: whilst we have made a significant progress in recent years, there is, to be frank, far too much tolerance of extremism in our country. So we need to become far more robust in identifying it and stopping it out across the public sector and across society. That will require some difficult and often embarrassing conversations, but the whole of the country needs to come together to take on this extremism, as our Prime Minister in her statement at that time. On the 22nd of June, the Honourable Member for Newark, during a statement on terrorism, called on the Home Secretary to ban Hezbollah. To support his request, he gave a first-hand account, a visible one, of what he had cited as a celebration of the terror group Hezbollah that he had witnessed on 18th of June at Al-Quds rally in central London. The Honourable Gentleman explained in some detail how people were walking down the streets of this city waving the flag of the genocidal, that's what they are, terror group Hezbollah, while simultaneously mocking the British laws that allowed them to do so, and how frustrating that was. There can surely, Madam Deputy Speaker, be no greater and more blatant illustration of the Prime Minister's view that we are far too tolerant of extremists like this, and that's why this debate is important. It's also important to remember the context. In 2017, a year marred with terror attacks in Manchester and London, our government allowed this march to take place. I question why that was allowed. In response to the Honourable Member for Newark, the Home Secretary agreed to come back and discuss the matter with him, and if necessary to come back to this House. I understand that there's been a chasm of silence since then, and that would concern me. As with many issues, Madam Deputy Speaker, there may be a belief that if we let matters sit and cool, sometimes people don't demand firm action to be taken, and this is not one of these times, and the Home Secretary's commitment must be action. But I thank the Honourable Lady for Enfield North and those other colleagues who backed the call for the backbench debate. We can have a full discussion today and hopefully action, and we do look to the Minister, and the call for action is coming from every right honourable and honourable member in relation to him. And let me make it something quite clear before we start. This is not a campaign to satisfy a handful of MPs. It goes much wider than that. In a campaign organised by the Israel-Britain Alliance and its numerous partners, more than 10,000 people have written to their MPs to register their concerns about the government's delusion that Hezbollah is two separate organisations, and to highlight the dereliction of its first duty to protect the public. For the record, Madam Deputy Speaker, the evidence publicly available that Hezbollah is a single organisation with a single command structure is proved beyond all reasonable doubt. Add the fact the government's own assessment of Hezbollah's capability not only renders the government's untenable and demands the protection that the evidence points to. I am concerned that we are not being given the full story about the need that is there, and whether the Honourable Gentleman referred to that there may be some evidential base out there that we want to see them in open, but the government is also very aware of the sleepers that there are for Hezbollah, and they're watching them as well. So those who think that maybe they're not being seen, let's make it very clear, they are being seen, and we know who they are. I am concerned that we are not given the full story. Only 3 days ago, in answer to a question from the Honourable Lady for Warrington North, the Minister stated, and I quote, "The military and political activities of Hezbollah are distinct, though links exist between the senior leaders of the political and military wings." The UK prescribed Hezbollah's external security organisation in March 2001, and in 2008 the prescription was extended to Hezbollah's military apparatus. My concern is that while we drag our feet with taking the action that needs to be taken, we are placing the British people in grave danger, and that's our responsibility to look after them. Very happy to, yes, absolutely.
Madam Deputy Speaker, please do not think the House I support Hezbollah. All I say is there may be some reason that we can't know about, me having been in intelligence, that they're not actually banning the political wing of Hezbollah in this country. It may be something very, very important, and it may be the decision is made like that to protect us. Otherwise, it might be much more difficult. I don't know.
Gallant gentleman for his intervention. But let's make it quite clear today. We want the prescription of Hezbollah. That's the thrust of this debate. That's what we're about. There is no two wings of Hezbollah, and that's very clear. I'm very happy to give way.
Just to clarify, most members of the armed forces can't comment on these issues, but very senior members of our armed forces, when they are no longer active serving members, they have made it very clear that they think this is a false division and it should be prescribed in its entirety. And I agree with them, although I understand the honourable gentleman isn't saying he supports Hezbollah.
I thank the Honourable Lady for the intervention. I'm going to come on to one clear example of an ex-soldier who is clearly has a knowledge and his position will become clear. And when you perhaps maybe for everyone in the chamber, we will be able then to probably look at the thing, why we need it and why we want it. Hezbollah leaders openly state that there is no separation between its component parts and the group in its entirety. Meets the criteria for full prescription under the 2000 Terrorism Act. Hezbollah's leaders have repeatedly encouraged terrorism, supported jihad and supported martyrdom. Hezbollah has been responsible for attacks on Jewish people across the globe. All members have said it. And yet last year, as the Honourable Member for Newark witnessed and highlighted, people with Hezbollah flags marched down Oxford Street celebrating Al-Quds Day with complete disregard, with their AK-47 on their flag. I tell you what, if that's not provocative, if that's not illegal, I'd like to know what is. Along with the flags and the banners of that day, we had all the associated inflammatory rhetoric, because the purpose of the demonstration was to agitate for violent resistance and the destruction of the State of Israel under the euphemism of liberating Al-Quds Jerusalem. The context is militaristic, not political, and the domestic consequence of current government policy that the Minister will repeat in due course is a fabricated division that allows public support for a terrorist organisation and the presence of anti-Semitism to flourish freely on our streets. This House, many members across this chamber have made it clear we have taken a stance against anti-Semitism. Government has taken a stance against anti-Semitism. There are others who need to be stronger when it comes to taking their stance, and we've encouraged them to do so. And the actions I believe the actions are detrimental to social cohesion and damage community relations, and that's why Hezbollah must be banned. Colonel Richard Kemp, and that's the person I'm going to refer to now, the former head of the International Terrorism Team at the Cabinet Office, someone whose credentials are impeccable. I hope we can all respect in this House explains the FCO position. The Foreign Office deludes itself that by appeasing Hezbollah it can influence the organisation and it will do its killing elsewhere. Instead, this gives legitimacy to Hezbollah, piling appeasement on appeasement. Britain and the rest of the EU hope to mollify Iran, the biggest state supporter of terrorism. They know that designating Hezbollah would enrage the Ayatollahs. Quite happy to give way. Yeah.
He's completely right to quote Richard Kemp, and I want to refer him as well to Lord Dannett, the former Chief of the General Staff, who has made exactly the same point. And I'm not calling into question the Honourable Member for Beckenham's motives, or questioning, his sort of why he's saying what he's saying. But I'm just saying the fact that Richard Kemp and Lord Dannett both make the opposite point. I mean, I think they would be aware if such intelligence existed.
Absolutely.
I thank my honourable colleague for that intervention and for that extra evidential base which we need for this debate, and which he has very clearly put on record. The current Foreign Office position appears to be creating two delusions: one, that Hezbollah is a single organisation, and two, that it does its killing elsewhere. Colonel Richard Kemp's column in the Times also devastates the second Foreign Office fable that we are not in danger. He explained, and I quote again for the record, during the campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan, Hezbollah was involved in Iranian-directed bombings that killed well over 1,000 British and US servicemen. Despite this, in Britain and elsewhere in Europe, Hezbollah can freely raise funds for terrorism. Its supporters flaunt their assault rifle and blazoned flags on our streets. They maintain sleeper cells in the country, planning, preparing and lying in wait for orders to attack. Can I commend, Madam Deputy Speaker, our security forces for their real good work that everyone in this House endorses and supports, and the intelligence services that we have, the best in the world, and we're very happy to have them. Madam Deputy Speaker, when you hear those things, my goodness, you really say to yourself, what damning testimony there is. I'm coming to the end, Madam Deputy Speaker. I see you looking at me, and I understand that to be the case. Those who seek to appease in the Foreign Office, fearful of offending the Ayatollahs, are allowing people to celebrate an organisation on our streets that has been complicit in the killing of British soldiers. Our British soldiers that we have a responsibility here to look after, to nurture, to care for, to look after, and their families as well. And this cannot be allowed to continue. It is past time that government does the right thing and bans Hezbollah. And what may you ask will it achieve? Let me quote Hezbollah's Secretary-General, Hassan Nasrallah, on that question. The sources of our funding would dry up. And here's a good reason. The sources of our funding would dry up, and the sources of moral, political and material support will be destroyed. So if you want a good reason for prescribing Hezbollah, that has to be one. Give way.
Does the honourable member agree with me that this is the consequences of the Iranian nuclear deal, that money is going from Iran directly to Hezbollah and other terrorist proxies in the Middle East?
Thank the honourable gentleman for that. I do agree absolutely, and I can commend him for his contribution in this House as well. He's been a stalwart supporter, and I know that sometimes, Madam Deputy Chair, we've had debates in the House here, and I know that whenever we were speaking about the Iran nuclear deal, that he was on that side of the House and I was on this side of the House saying the same thing, and it was good to have that consensus of opinion that came across, and then with many others who joined in it as well. The reason why we need to do it, Madam Deputy Speaker, is because of that very reason. The money will dry up, the funding will dry up, and then we take away their moral, we take away their political, we take away their material support, and that will all be destroyed. I'm quite happy to, yeah.
Will he agree with me that extending prescription in the way I think pretty much every member has called for is really important if we're to ensure Hezbollah cannot use the banking system in this country to further their evil ends?
I thank the honourable lady for that there, yeah. You starve them of the monies, starve them of the funds, and you take away their blood that they need to exist on. And I think it's important that we do that. And by prescribing Hezbollah and by removing all the resources and the bones of the system that they have to try and move forward, then I think that's one way of doing it. Can I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe that the British people and I will happily accept that outcome, the prescription of Hezbollah, putting the public at risk. And yeah.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. Would he agree with me, however, that whilst we do require the prescription completely of Hezbollah as an organisation, we should never lose sight of the fact that it is a proxy for the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is causing so much havoc and distress throughout the Middle East and beyond?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention and fully endorse, Madam Deputy Speaker, his sentiments in relation to that. It's clear to me, I think it's clear to us all in this House, that the Iranian National Guard have such control that their influence goes out to Hezbollah, that they encourage Hezbollah. I mean, where have we got them in the world? Everywhere where there's contention, where there's murder, where there's conflict, and that's the frustration we have. Putting the public at risk, changing the odds in favour of terror suspects and away from those with protecting us is, at the very best, grossly complacent and at the worst, disastrous for public security. Can I say, last sentence, in memory of the British victims of Hezbollah, Madam Deputy Speaker, this terror group, this scum of the earth, I believe, should be banned from the day and further afield. Thank you.
Stuart MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This debate has been a passionate one, but also a thoughtful one, so I congratulate the honourable member for Enfield North and her colleagues for bringing it to the House. Members have repeatedly made clear that Hezbollah, in the broadest sense, has engaged in atrocious terrorist activity. They've highlighted attacks in the Middle East, but also beyond, in Bulgaria in 2012, where a bus of Israeli tourists was blown up, in Buenos Aires, the 1994 bombing of the Israeli embassy, and later the detonation of explosives outside the Argentinian-Israeli Mutual Association. Plots and activity have included Thailand, Nigeria, Cyprus and many more countries. So those arguing in favour of the motion have made a powerful case for full prescription. And, for example, I think Honourable Member for Chipping Barnett and others have highlighted the knock-on consequences of sticking only with partial prescription that has on law enforcement here, including the seizing of financial assets, for example. So is there any possible counter-argument? In supporting what we could call partial prescription, the Home Office under the previous Labour Government pointed to a legitimate political, social and humanitarian role Hezbollah plays in Lebanon, while in a debate just before Christmas, when this issue was raised, the Security Minister pointed out that Hezbollah forms part of the Government of Lebanon. And that has meant that much of the debate today has focused on whether Hezbollah is just one organisation and whether it is realistic to divide it into political, military and terrorist parts, as some countries do, like the UK, but not just the UK, for the purposes of prescription. In the December debate, the Minister himself said, if the non-military wing is viewed as not separate, we will review the situation and use the law to take the required steps. And members have argued today that these are false and unreal distinctions, pointing even to the rhetoric of Hezbollah members themselves, and arguing that there is a unified decision-making power in the Consultative Council. So the next question I suppose that arises, Madam Deputy Speaker, is does it matter that there is a degree of unity at the top if there are clearly distinct branches which can be separated? And it is only fair to record that different countries have taken different approaches to that question. For the Netherlands, as we've heard, that did matter, and it was conclusive of their approach to the issue. In their annual report in 2004, its General Intelligence and Security Services stated, it can also be concluded that Hezbollah's political and terrorist wings are controlled by one coordinating council. This means that there is indeed a link between these parts of the organisation. The Netherlands has changed its policy and no longer makes a distinction between the political and terrorist Hezbollah branches. But in fairness, it is not all countries that take that approach, and it isn't, for example, the approach taken in Australia, where what it refers to as the external security organisation of Hezbollah is listed as a terrorist organisation, but not Hezbollah as a whole. In its statement explaining their decision, the government does not seek to argue that there are very distinct organisations. The Australian government describes, on the one hand, a pragmatic political organisation with deep roots in Lebanese society, which maintain a social welfare network that encompasses education and health services, but at the same time includes what it describes as a branch, the ESO, responsible for the planning, coordination and execution of terrorist attacks against Hezbollah's enemies outside of Lebanon. So despite the fact that the Australian government takes a view that ESO is a branch of a bigger organisation, it simply chose to prescribe the branch rather than the whole organisation. So different governments can come to different views. And of course, as some honourable members have pointed out, it is also relevant to note that under the 2000 Act, the Home Secretary has powers, but not a duty to prescribe organisation. It is a may rather than a must. And as some honourable members have alluded to, one wonders whether there are other considerations at play here, including a desire to keep certain diplomatic channels open and concerns about maintaining stability in Lebanon. We know that the President of Lebanon in the past has previously asked the EU itself and member countries not to prescribe Hezbollah, describing it as an essential component of Lebanese society. But in response, the honourable member for Enfield North fairly points out that those countries that do prescribe the whole group do continue to play a diplomatic role in the country. It doesn't have to end there. So I do not envy the task that the Minister has, or the decisions that he has to make. That said, one problem that I have raised before in relation to debates on prescription of terrorist organisations is that the information I have, or honourable members have at their disposal, is, I suspect, but a drop in the ocean compared to what is available to the Minister making the decision. And I think that was the point, essentially, that the honourable and gallant member for Beckenham alluded to in his intervention. And I wonder if there may be a role for the Intelligence and Security Committee in scrutinising this type of decision and advising members more generally. But in conclusion, once again, Madam Deputy Speaker, I congratulate honourable members for bringing this debate and for posing serious and difficult questions of the Government. I am sympathetic to the case that they make and await the Minister's response with interest, because it's fair to say that so far there has not been any coherent counter-argument.
Thomas Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And first of all, I should say that I am grateful to the Backbench Business Committee for agreeing to the application led by my right honourable friend, the member for Enfield North, and for bringing forward these very important issues. Whilst, of course, nobody in the House would deny the right to peaceful protest, we should, of course, debate in this House when there is offence and distress caused by public displays, and we should also be debating these very important issues of prescription. And I also thank my honourable friends, the members for Dudley North, Liverpool Riverside and Washington and Sunderland West, for their contributions to the debate today. And I do want to deal with this issue of the displaying of Hezbollah flags, which, at least in the short term, is what has led to this debate coming forward. But can I say at the outset that we on these benches unequivocally condemn support for violence and acts of terrorism, the likes of which have been described in the Chamber today, and we are grateful to the police and to our security services for the work that they do on a daily basis in keeping us all safe. Now, many members have spoken about the current position regarding prescription. And it is, of course, correct that in March of 2001, the Hezbollah external security organisation, part of the military wing, was proscribed. And in July of 2008, that was extended to the whole military wing, including the Jihad Council. The then Home Office Minister, Tony McNulty, a former member of this House, said in this House on the 2nd of July of 2008, the proscription of Hezbollah's military wing would not affect the role it played in Lebanon, but it would send out a clear message that we condemn Hezbollah's violence and support for terrorism. And of course it is the case today that Hezbollah forms part of the Parliament and the government of Lebanon. More recently, in December of last year, the Security Minister said, and I quote, "Those organisations, i.e. including Hezbollah, are not proscribed in their entirety. Their military wings are proscribed, but as Hezbollah forms part of the government in Lebanon, the proscription only applies to the military wing." Now, it is for the government to keep under review the organisations that it proscribes. They are always careful decisions, and clearly, I would suggest, in difficult and volatile situations, there has to be a balance between making absolutely clear our abhorrence for using violence to achieve political ends, but at the same time seeking to facilitate and encourage solutions to conflict through participation in the democratic process. Now, it is for the government, on the information it has before it, not all of which, I think as the Honourable Member for Beckenham was pointing out, may be in the public domain, to be vigilant in keeping the lists of proscribed organisations under review. The statutory test is under the Terrorism Act of 2000, and of course, as the opposition, we will hold the government to account on its application of the test, as we did just before Christmas in relation to a number of other organisations. And I would ask the Minister for that assurance today that he's previously given, that the situation is always kept under review. I do want to turn to the current position with the prescription situation as it is. I just want to make one remark as an aside, if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I do think it's important that there is a document, an internal document containing the position of the Labour front bench that got into the public domain today, and whilst colleagues may or may not disagree with that, there is an issue in that the front of that document contains the email address of the work email address of a member of my staff who, before I came into the chamber today, had already received an email as if he personally was responsible for the position of the entire Labour front bench, which clearly isn't the case. And I would ask those organisations that are displaying that document on the internet and elsewhere to remove the work email address of my member of staff so that he doesn't have to receive any more emails. It is for us in this House to take responsibility for our positions, not, I would suggest, for the staff who do an excellent job for us. It is correct, and I was very interested in the remarks made by the Honourable Member for Hendon in this regard, that for the displaying of the flag to be an offence under Section 13 of the Terrorism Act 2000, it is true it has to be in support of the prescribed elements of the group. That's absolutely right. But that does not mean that nothing can be done. And I haven't read the QC's advice that the Honourable Gentleman has referred to, but I'd be very interested to have a dialogue with whether it's the Metropolitan Police or indeed other police forces around the country on this matter. Because firstly, you have the issue of law enforcement agencies on the ground that judge the context and circumstances in which the flag is flown. But that is, of course, in relation to the Terrorism Act of 2000. There are other wider criminal offences in respect of public order, displays that cause harassment, alarm and distress, and issues about incitement, all of which can be enforced on the streets of our country. And I'd be very happy to give way to my friend.
He's completely right to say that the email address of his member of staff shouldn't be displayed on the internet. Absolutely. And I imagine he's referring to the brief. Yes. I mean, he's completely right about that. But I'm also concerned about some of its contents, and I'd like to ask, why doesn't this, given that he's raised this document, why doesn't it mention Hezbollah's anti-Semitism? And why does it suggest that Hezbollah could be a partner for peace when it's absolutely clear that they've got no interest in the peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians at all?
If I make just two points to my honourable friend. Firstly, when briefs are prepared, they tend to focus on the narrow issue of the debate. But let's be clear, we condemn anti-Semitism in all its forms. On the second point, with regard to peace going forward, I would simply make the point that we do have to be careful in terms of closing off diplomatic channels. I was very interested, for example, only a few months ago, to read the comments that were made by the former Prime Minister Tony Blair in respect of Hamas. And he was talking about the boycott of Hamas after the Palestinian elections of 2006. And this is what Tony Blair said. In retrospect, I think we should have, right at the beginning, tried to pull Hamas into a dialogue and shifted their positions. I think that's where I would be in retrospect. Now, whilst I don't for a moment underplay terrible, violent acts, I simply say that in these very difficult conflicts around the world, we are just careful about our maintenance of engagement. I'll give way first to the Honourable Member for Richmond Park, and I will certainly give way to the Member for Chipping Barnes.
An example at any time where not prescribing the whole of Hezbollah has in any way facilitated a move towards peace. Just one example.
It's a counterfactual question as to what would have happened had the whole organisation been prescribed. So I'm sure that the honourable gentleman would appreciate that that's entirely hypothetical. I give way to the honourable lady.
Hezbollah is a genocidal, violent, terrorist organisation dedicated to the destruction of the State of Israel. I challenge the opposition frontbench to support the calls that have come from all sides of the House today to prescribe it in its entirety.
Nobody, Madam Deputy Speaker, supports these terrible, violent, barbaric acts. We simply look at the situation as it is and try to strike a balance. Now, I've already set out the position. I'll deal with them for Croydon in a moment. I've already set out the position that I would be happy to speak to police forces around the country about use of the powers they have at the moment. We on these benches condemn that violence absolutely, and we continue to support the prescription of the military wing, as has been the position of the government. I'll just make this one point, and I will give way to the member for Clwyd West. We simply say that we believe engagement with the government and Parliament of Lebanon is very important in terms of the wider Middle East peace process. And I would simply say that we should be very careful about damaging that engagement. But it is, of course, a question of balance. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
It was, of course, a Labour government in 2008 that drew the distinction between the military wing and the political wing of Hezbollah. Everybody who's spoken in this debate today regards that as a nonsense and as a fiction. What is the position of the Labour frontbench on that?
I've heard, of course, a number of speakers make the point about the links. I would simply observe that the activities are distinct. The activities of violence on the one hand, which we absolutely condemn, but on the other, engagement with the democratic process. And I would simply say that we on these benches have supported the balance that the government is striking. That isn't to say, of course, that I'm not very sensitive to views I've heard all around the chamber. I respect the views that colleagues have put forward on all sides of the House. But we do believe, when analysing these very, very difficult matters of prescription, these very important matters, that the balance as it stands of prescribing the military wing, which we absolutely support, should not at this stage be extended to the political wing for the reasons I've set out.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate honourable members, including the member for Enfield North, for securing this debate today and for raising the important issue. The government is proud to be a friend of Israel, proud to support working with Israel, and no one on this side of the House, or anybody in this House, supports the use of terrorism or violence. I myself, as the honourable member for Beckenham, have been often on the wrong side of terrorist attack. I have first-hand experience of violence, intimidation and terrorism, and no one more than me wants to see people that use violence to progress their beliefs be stopped and prosecuted and put away or driven out of this country at the bare minimum. So maybe I should start by reassuring honourable members that as the Minister of State for Security and along with the government, we are determined to do all we can to minimise the threat from terrorism to the United Kingdom, to our interests abroad and to our friends abroad, and to disrupt those who engage in it. Prescription is an important part of the government's strategy, but not the only part, to disrupt the activities of terrorist groups and those who provide support to them. As many members here have said today already, Hezbollah was established during the Lebanese Civil War and in the aftermath of the Israeli incursion in Lebanon in 1982. From the outset, resistance to Israel has been an important part of Hezbollah's agenda. However, Hezbollah also represents Lebanon's Shia community, and over time it has gained significant support from that community. Hezbollah provides social and political functions in Lebanon, and as a major political group in the largest non-state military force in the country, Hezbollah clearly plays an important role in Lebanon. The UK government has long held the view that elements of Hezbollah have been involved in conducting and supporting terrorism and, as a result, have proscribed Hezbollah's external security organisation in 2001. And not only did I listen, but I also heeded many of the comments colleagues have said today about their statements, their beliefs, and they are outrageous, they are disgusting, and they should be condemned at all opportunities. They are anti-Semitic. They wish the destruction of our ally and friend, the State of Israel. None of that which we support. And then in 2008, in recognition of more of that type of activity, the prescription was extended to include the whole of Hezbollah's military apparatus, namely the Jihad Council and all the units reporting to it. Hezbollah's military wing is also designated in the UK under the Terrorist Asset Freezing Act 2010. Therefore, funds or economic resources owned or held or controlled by Hezbollah's military wing in the UK can be and will be frozen. And in July 2012, the EU designated Hezbollah military wing as a terrorist organisation under the EU asset freezing regime. While the prescription of Hezbollah in entirety is kept under review, our current position maintains a balance. Now, I've heard from many of the members today about their view that they are indivisible, that Hezbollah military and political wing cannot be divided, that they are joined at the hip, that they are centrally led. That is not, as the Honourable Member for Cumbernauld pointed out, the view of every country. Australia, New Zealand and the EU take a different view. But what I can give, just to finish, what I can pledge to the House, as with all other groups, we constantly monitor these groups and individuals involved in these groups, and we constantly review the prescription, the use of prescription as a means to take action where we see fit. And just to reassure some members, because it's sort of been implied that it's ministers that pick off the top of their head the idea of who to prescribe, and that we ignore our security services, our police or the military. Richard Kemp is often quoted. We don't make prescription decisions based on ministers around a cup of coffee making it up. We make it on the recommendations submitted to us by our law enforcement agencies and our security services, both here and overseas intelligence services, and make a judgment there. I'll give way first of all to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He makes the point that it is not the view of every country, of every security service, that Hezbollah is indivisible. But isn't his difficulty that it is Hezbollah's own view that it is indivisible, and that Hezbollah itself considers itself to be a single organisation?
My right honourable friend makes a valid point, but it is also difficult, which he must recognise, to separate Hezbollah from the state of Lebanon. Hezbollah is in the parliament, is in the government, and that represents a different challenge than we find with many other terrorist groups. So give way to...
The Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee dealt with that point very eloquently. But this point about Hezbollah being one single organisation, as the Right Honourable Member for Conwy said, Hezbollah's political affairs official, Amma Massawi, said, everyone is aware of the fact that Hezbollah is one body and one entity. Its military and political wings are unified. That's what they're saying. It's not what we're saying, it's what they're saying. That's the point the government should be considering.
with all due respect to the honourable member, I also have to take regard of the point that I do, I'm afraid, disagree with the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. I visited Lebanon in June last year to meet the government, the Lebanese armed forces and other agencies, including the United Nations, to discuss the future of Lebanon and the United Kingdom assistance to it. And I disagree with his view about engaging with the Lebanese government and what barriers could or could not be removed to that. I'll give way and then I will press on.
Giving way, just a simple question. Does he believe that the United States has any difficulty engaging in dialogue with Lebanon, given that they have taken the view, as this House has clearly taken today, that both parts of Hezbollah are one and the same, that there's no division?
Well, the United States, there are 2 points I'd like to make to my honourable friend. First of all, the United States do find it harder to engage with Lebanon than the United Kingdom government. And I visited the United States Embassy when I was in Beirut and spent time at the memorial to those killed, US Marines at the time. So the United States don't take these things lightly. They do what they can in Lebanon to secure Lebanon as a strong state. But the other part of the observation is the United States has prescribed Hezbollah in its entirety for some time. And as we heard from honourable members opposite, that hasn't prevented Hezbollah growing exponentially either. It hasn't been a silver bullet. It hasn't stopped Hezbollah behaving as it has. And that's why earlier in the speech I made the clear point that prescription is one part of our tool in dealing with terrorism, hatred and all the incitement. Now, I said I would press on before I gave way. No, we don't condone, the government doesn't condone any terrorist activity, and we do continue to call and press Hezbollah to end its status as an armed group, as well as participate in the Lebanese democratic process on the same terms as other political parties. And as you'll be aware, Madam Deputy Speaker, groups that are not included on the list of proscribed organisations are not free to spread hate, fund terrorist activity or incite violence as they please. By not being prescribed doesn't mean to say you can just do lots of things that we would view as illegal. I'll give way to Lon.
I think let's cut through the rhetoric and just ask a simple question. What does he think the motivation is of British nationals flying a foreign flag of a political organisation whose stated aims are to kill every Jew and to annihilate the state of Israel?
Well, I'm not going to speak on behalf of protesters I've never met walking down Oxford Street, but what I will say is, and I listened to his points earlier about frustrations with the police in taking action. The police already have comprehensive powers to take actions against individuals under criminal law, regardless of not whether they are prescribed. And the honourable gentleman from the front bench also made that point. Part 3 of the Public Order Act 1996, whether it's Part 3A about religious hatred or Part 3 in itself, which is about racial hatred, gives police the powers to prosecute people. It is perfectly possible to actually stand up with a national flag and incite hatred or religious hatred and find yourself prosecuted and convicted of a criminal offence. Not prescribing Hamas in no way prevents the police taking action, or the CPS, against that type of incitement. And I certainly hope that the CPS and the police listen to members' concerns today. I will certainly raise that when I next see them. But I think, and I heard my right honourable friend, the member for Chipping Barnett's point, that somehow not prescribing it hinders our police. It doesn't. I'm afraid. It absolutely doesn't. If they're involved in drug stealing or money laundering, I as well as the Minister for Security, I'm also now the Minister for Security and Economic Crime. There is a plethora of offences on the statute book and powers we can use to weaken Hezbollah, to prevent them doing things that are either illegal in the criminal space or illegal or in areas that go against our national security. It does not hinder them in the way that somehow it is being alluded that without the prescription of the other half, somehow this country would be unable to protect its citizens and its interests from the actions of Hezbollah. So
Minister, I'm reminded of the analogy of the Siamese twin. The Siamese twin is the Hezbollah politics, Hezbollah armed resurrection and guerrilla warfare and so on. The blood that flows through one flows through the other. What we're suggesting to the Minister very gently as this, or maybe very forcibly perhaps, is that we need to see Hezbollah prescribed, because by doing so you take away their money, you take away their resources, you take away their moral and their political livelihood, and if you do that then you stop the killing, and that's got to be the way forward.
Due respect to the honourable member opposite, we take action against Hezbollah, non-Hezbollah actors where they are involved in criminality, whether intelligence or evidence is given for us to be able to take action across a whole range of issues. So it is not the case that because, let's say, he says the political wing is not prescribed, we sit back and do nothing about it. We do everything we can, and when evidence is presented, and the worrying point about my honourable friend's point, honourable friend from Henderson's point, is where people present evidence to the police, or sit down with the police and say, we believe in some of the statements about the Grenfell Tower that no action is being taken. And I think everyone in this House would urge CPS and police to use the range of powers that they have at their disposal to take action and not tolerate such horrendous both statements and incitement.
I gave examples of hate speech on our streets, and it appears that the police are reluctant or unable to take any action against it. Doesn't he agree that that's appalling? Doesn't he also agree that were Hezbollah to have been prescribed, people on that march waving flags would simply not have been allowed to go ahead with their hate speech and incitement?
As to the first point of the honourable lady, I think it is not acceptable that when we see police or CPS not take action when there is offences available for them to do so. So it is not that they're not able, it is a choice that they may have made either for resource, and we can debate the resource, or it may be because they have found that for good of the public good they would do something about it later. Now, I have stood on the Falls Road for many months of my life watching paramilitary flags go past me, and we had the power to do something, but it was viewed for the good of the public order, maybe, at the time when I was a soldier on those streets, that we did not do anything about it. Now, I don't know about the individual motives of that march and the police on that day, but it is not the case they don't have the power to do something. This House has given them the powers year on year over many decades to take action. And I think all of us feel, especially in this social media age where we are inundated often by hate and intimidation, whether on Twitter or emails, all of us feel that this is a broader debate about how can we deal and prosecute hate in this country and extremism, which unfortunately, from my point of view, seems to be on an upward curve, not a downward curve, amongst groups of people in society. And political parties of all colours need to send very strong messages to supporters or allies or overexcited individuals who seek to take our party's names and use it alongside hatred, anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobic comments. All of that is unacceptable, and I think we shouldn't forget, though, we need to help encourage our police and CPS to actually take action and set an example about some of these plans. As I said, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government continues to exercise prescription power in a proportionate manner in accordance with the law, and we will continue to monitor groups and people we have of concern. Section 3 of the Terrorism Act provides a power of the Home Secretary to prescribe the organisation if she believes it is concerned in terrorism. The Act specifies that an organisation is concerned in terrorism if it commits or participates in acts of terrorism, prepares for terrorism, promotes or encourages terrorism, or is otherwise concerned in terrorism. If the test is met, the Home Secretary must then exercise their discretion to prescribe the organisation. May then, in considering whether to exercise this discretion, she is also guided by the nature and scale of the organisation's activities, the specific threat that it poses to the United Kingdom, the specific threat that it poses to British nationals overseas, the organisation's presence in the United Kingdom, and the need to support other members of the international community in tackling terrorism. Given the wide-ranging impact of prescription, the Home Secretary exercises her powers to prescribe only after a thorough review of the available relevant information and evidence on the organisation. For an individual to be prescribed, the Police and Crown Prosecution Service must evidence to the criminal standard of beyond reasonable doubt that the context and manner for which the flag was displayed, for example, aroused reasonable suspicion that the individual is specifically a member or a supporter of that prescribed group and elements of a wider group. Peaceful process is a vital part of our democratic society. It's a long-standing tradition in this country that people are free to gather together and to demonstrate their views, however uncomfortable or repugnant these can be to the majority of us. They do so, and they have to do so within the law. There is, of course, a balance to be struck. Protesters' rights need to be balanced with the rights of others to go about their business without fear of intimidation or serious disruption to the community. Rights to peaceful process do not extend to violent or threatening behaviour, and the police have powers to deal with as many such acts as I've said. The management process is, of course, a matter left to the police. The investigation and prosecution for all criminal offences, as I've said earlier, is a matter for the Crown Prosecution Service and the police, and I will happily push to the organisations, the police and CPS, the messages I've heard from the House today to make sure they step up efforts in this area.
Thank you very much for giving way again. The government will have its reasons. I can't understand them, but it has its reasons for not wanting to prescribe Hezbollah in its entirety. But would he not accept that maintaining this pretense that there is a division between the two branches of Hezbollah reflects very badly on this place, very badly on government? It looks like weakness, and it is embarrassing.
Well, I listen to my honourable friend. Look, there are lots of reasons. Maybe I can offer the House one reason. And you may not agree with the reason, but it is a reason that I felt at first hand when I was in Lebanon on behalf of the government. We believe that the best way to weaken Hezbollah in the region and further afield is a strong state of Lebanon. The stronger the state of Lebanon, which represents multi-faith, it has a democracy, it has speakers of parliament, it recognises the individual religious minorities in the country, the weaker Hezbollah will be. It is not in our interest to have a weak, fractured Lebanon. We shouldn't forget that Hezbollah's birth and strength started in the civil war of Lebanon, when Lebanese were killing Lebanese, crews were killing Muslims were killing Christians. And so one of the reasons that I think and we think is the way to make sure Hezbollah become contained and are persuaded to follow a course of peace. And I listened to the honourable member for Dudley North that he does not believe, and many of us in this House may agree with him, however, is to have a strong state of Lebanon. That is in our interest. I want to see that the British government assists with aid, helping the Lebanese army, training the Lebanese army, making sure that they can defend their state, encouraging the ministers of all faiths in that government who believe in Lebanon rather than a non-military actor or an overburdened group of one minority or the other. And that is one logical reason that I believe we have to take some of these difficult decisions about trying to find a balance. Because when you see Lebanon, you meet the ministers struggling to survive in a rough neighbourhood, trying to build a nation state, living with the shadow over their shoulder that we have talked about today. Their best defence is a strong, capable state of Lebanon with all its safeguards and its constitution, and they will be no better off, they will be worse off, we will be worse off, the region will be worse off with an unstable, weak, fractious civil war going on in that country.
I'm grateful for the Minister giving way just before he sums up. That's all very well about Lebanon, but my concern are constituents are hindered. And when they can't go into central London, the police are overstretched, they're called Nazis, they're spat at, and people are violent and anti-Semitic. So my concern is the people of this country and the people of the Hendon constituency.
I've listened to the honourable member. The people of this country will not be better off with an even more fractious, fighting, divided, murderous Middle East going on. And secondly, he will know that, first of all, many of the things he has talked about just now about his constituency, they are criminal offences. They can be prosecuted right now. Well, as I have said earlier to the honourable member, that is a matter for the police to prosecute people spitting and inciting hatred. We have a separation, we have operational independence in this country between ministers and the police. We can talk about whether we're giving the right resources, and we regularly do across the dispatch box, but fundamentally, if he is talking about what is going to protect his citizens, whether they are Christian or Jewish or Muslim, what is going to protect this citizens is the United Kingdom government giving the powers, along with Parliament giving powers to our law enforcement and our security services to keep us safe, helping fund those organisations to enact those powers and keep us safe, and dealing with threat based on intelligence as we receive it, and making sure we de-radicalise other people who may be attracted to hate and radicalisation. So I don't say, because his constituents are being abused, that is not a failure of the government. That is a question to ask the police. We will help him make sure the police deal with that. But I have to say that is not because of the partial prescription or de-prescription of Hezbollah. And I think he must understand, I'm sure he does agree, that a stable Middle East is the best way to provide long-term peace to both Europe and the United Kingdom in the long run. We do not want an unstable Middle East at all. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've listened. There are some very valid points being made by members from all sides of this House. I heed the points that they make. My commitment as the Security Minister is we will continue to keep under review groups like Hezbollah. We will continue to talk to our friends and allies, both in the region and indeed across the world. But we will fundamentally focus on what we need to do to keep this United Kingdom safe, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And I will certainly do my best to encourage police and our political parties and all our supporters and friends to make sure that hate is not tolerated, no matter who it is aimed at.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I begin my closing remarks by thanking the Backbench Committee for allowing this debate, and to thank my honourable friend for Liverpool Riverside and the honourable member for Strangford who came with me to the committee to secure this debate. I'd also like to thank the Right Honourable Member for Chipping Barnet, the Honourable Member for Dudley North, the Right Honourable Member for Clwyd West, the Honourable Member for Liverpool Riverside, the Honourable Member for Hendon, the Honourable Member for Washington and Sunderland West, and the Honourable Member for Strangford for their contributions to this debate, which I think have been powerful contributions and very much appreciated. I'd like to draw attention to the fact that not a single member, either in their speeches or in their interventions, a single backbench member or right honourable member, has opposed this motion, which I think speaks volumes about where this House thinks it should be on this matter. I'd also like to say that the public agree with us, as the Honourable Member for Hendon told us earlier on. Comres poll undertaken and reported today shows that 81% of the public also believe Hezbollah should be prescribed in its entirety. The Honourable Member for Cumbernauld, Kilsyth and Kirkcaldy East, spokesperson for the SNP, has said he is sympathetic to the motion, and we welcome that sympathy, and we hope it will turn into something a little more forceful policy-wise. I hope very much to persuade my honourable friend, the member for Torfaen, who speaks for the Labour front bench, I very much hope to persuade him that prescribing Hezbollah in its entirety is the right thing to do. And I hope to have further discussions with him on this. But I appreciate the tone he took in today's debate. I'd like to say to the House, the havoc and death and destruction that Hezbollah have caused in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon and Israel, indeed across the Middle East, also in Nigeria, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Argentina, Thailand and other places, has been outlined today, to our horror. What about the streets of London? The CST has made it clear that the domestic consequences of this artificial division with Hezbollah have consequences here, that they allow the public they pursue a policy that allows public support for a terrorist and anti-Semitic organisation. I think the argument the Minister made is a little bit tortuous. The US, Canada, others prescribe Hezbollah and still manage to talk to them, and no peace has been forthcoming in Hezbollah, despite not prescribing. We are giving moral, political and social authority to Hezbollah by not prescribing them in their entirety, because Hezbollah themselves do not agree with the government. I think the government should look again at this position. Keeping it under review is not adequate. They are wrong.
Question is as on the order papers. Many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.